in the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie, since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. It would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others could have the same impudence to distort the truth so infamously. For the grossly impudent lie always leaves traces behind, even after it has been nailed down, a fact which is known to all expert liars in this world, and to all who conspire together in the art of lying. Adolf Hitler. Mein Kampf.
We could live, ever suffer. As one together forever.
Welcome back, gentle viewers. After the success of the first season of Carmilla in 2014, Kotex saw it as an effective marketing vehicle, so they okayed a second season in the spring of 2015, with some additional content in transmedia and a 2014 Christmas special, to bridge the gap between the end of the first season and the beginning of the second. This success brought it the moniker of the little web series that could, something that it would repeat 3 times more with Season 0, Season 3, and the 2017 movie. Once again written by Jordan Hall and directed by Spencer Mabey, Carmilla Season 2 deepens the theme of the series with a more serious tone as the grim realities of the show start to come into sharp focus. If Season 1 was an opportunity for youthful nerds to play in a fun environment with vampires and spirits, Season 2 is about the loss of innocence and becoming an adult in a world where the normal rules of civilization do not apply, due to anarchy, fascism, and weird vampire stuff. The season arc tells a story about the Holocaust in a somewhat muddled metaphor, with Silas University as a stand-in for Germany, sympathetic Nazi figures, and morally ambiguous Jewish figures.
We need to hide them, now.
What?
The stormtroopers are coming.
As well as a nod to the writings of 20th century French philosopher Albert Camus. Unfortunately, there's no interview with any of the writers that gives any insight as to what they were hoping to accomplish with this Holocaust metaphor. All I have to go on is that producer Steph Walkneen is Jewish. She possibly instigated it. What she hoped to accomplish, I don't know. She's never said anything about it. Steph Walkneen is Jewish. That's all I have to go on. It's the most difficult season to watch because it heavily emphasizes drama and actively punishes you for enjoying the first season.
This isn't some project. This isn't fun. People are dead. Again. And the 3 of you acting like this is some Silas-themed episode of The X-Files with cool vampire girlfriends and disembodied sidekicks. Well, it's callous and it's cruel and...
I don't care. We didn't mean it like that. Honest.
The first season had a goofy tone. The second season has a serious tone. And if you think that it's goofy this time, what are you doing? People's lives are at stake. That said, even with that and the muddled Nazi metaphor, it is the best written season. Something that you can point to and say, yeah, Carmilla is a good show.
With her gone, the resistance will scatter, and between the villagers and my guys, you're seriously outnumbered. Surrender now, and we'll let you live.
I'd rather see how many of you I can take with me.
I'm in the minority for this opinion, though, because there was a huge fan backlash to the serious tone, and there was a bit of course correction in the following seasons. Few dangling plot threads never got resolved, and people generally like to forget that certain things happened in season 2.
Whoa!
Which is a shame, because I like it. It's honestly a good season.
Do you think I hid you here after everything because I don't care? Because the thought of something happening to you doesn't make me feel like I can't breathe? And I don't know how I'm supposed to feel around you or what I'm supposed to do because...
Something that should be celebrated.
Life is awful and incomprehensible, so it's usually better to be terrified together.
Something we can celebrate now.
You care about her. So here's how it's gonna be. I'll call Laugh and JP, and they will help her, and then I will hide the two of you here until she recovers. And in return, neither of you is going to bite, maim, or kill anyone at all for any reason. Because if you do, I will have the Baron's army of steak-happy super minions down here so fast that you'll get whiplash. Understood?
This review is going to be significantly longer than the previous one because the series is longer. The season is basically 40 minutes longer than season 1, has more plot threads, more themes. It just takes longer to talk about.
It is almost 2 in the morning, and I am so tired.
So I'm gonna have to break this review into 3 parts. 1 to talk about the first half of season 2, and the Christmas special.
It's Christmas. You don't murder people for Christmas.
A holiday where you can't kill people is a stupid holiday.
All of you, shh, they will hear us.
Some general setup themes, and part 2 to talk about the second half of season 2, and the general Nazi metaphor.
I shall lead you and Silas to greatness, to the shining, glorious future it has always deserved.
And part 3 to wrap up with a general thematic analysis, why the Nazi theme doesn't work, and how it fits in with Albert Camus. I suspect that most people will skip the part 2 because, people like the first part, they like the conclusion, but the second part never receives enough love.
Love will be cruel to it entices.
According to the Transmedia, student reporters working for the Voice of Silas newspaper explore the Lustig crater where Lofiformes is housed and discover cuneiform, ancient Sumerian writing, on the walls, pointing at some kind of significance to the cavern beyond Lofi. Before they can investigate further, Lofi wakes up, bleeding black sludge from her injured Eska, the light-generating organ, but very much alive. She hypnotizes the students, making them worship her as a god, and then rises from the depths of the underworld. It's all very similar to the glow cloud, all hail, and welcome to Night Vale. The creature stared up at us, rage and hunger beyond any human measure, eclipsing our puny minds. The black slime that coated the walls seemed to be oozing from a wound in the bulbous end of a huge antenna-like organ which stretched limp across the crater's floor. The horror of its flesh, the putrid odor that oozed with black blood from the great gaping wound on its head. We gibbered and drooled and fled the great rage of the Deep One. Even now, writing these words, humanity feels like a distant dream. My mind is lost forever in the blackness at the bottom of the Lustig crater. In next week's column, we will explore our duties in service of the great and terrible Lofiformes, and also a series of tips on how to make your second semester at Silas a success.
No way for you to hide from the demon of the light.
Laura, Carmilla, LaFontaine, and Perry, fans collectively call them the Scooby Gang, after the protagonists of Buffy.
Come on, Cordelia. You want to be a member of the Scooby Gang, you gotta be willing to be inconvenienced every now and then.
run away from their problems and try to make it to civilization, but get lost in the wilderness outside of Silas, which is just as supernatural as the campus itself. The Scoobies face threatening kobolds and other magical characters, while dealing with the tension of keeping a murderous vampire with them. Yes, Carmilla is a good fighter, and Laura's devoted girlfriend, but she's cranky, and has to be told not to eat, laugh, and parry, which she only obeys out of loyalty to Laura, not out of any kind of respect for the innate value of human life. This is an obvious problem waiting to happen, but Laura ignores it, and Carmilla ends up biting someone with the intent to kill them. On Christmas Eve, they run across their first sign of civilization, a small village in the middle of the Styrian wilderness. It's a standard horror movie collection of peasants being terrorized by monsters. The kind of folks who warned Jonathan Harker not to do business with Count Dracula, or who grabbed torches and pitchforks to kill Frankenstein's monster. Their mayor holds a town meeting to encourage everyone to kill vampires, which offends Carmilla. She decides to celebrate the holiday with her family's traditional murdering someone for Christmas. It's implied that Laura stops her before she kills the mayor, but she certainly tries to. The Scoobies then end up running from the mob with torches and pitchforks. The Christmas special begins with them holing up in a mysterious diner, where the villagers fear to go. A riff on the plot of Buffy Season 5 Episode 20 Spiral, when those Scoobies run from the Knights of Byzantium and hole up in an old gas station that Willow protects with a force field spell. Laura updates her fans by making a holiday video on her laptop webcam, where we see the basic conflict of Laura missing her father and family traditions, versus celebrating in a new way with her found family, with Carmilla as her distorted, villainous doppelganger. Carmilla misses murdering someone for Christmas with her vampire family, is grouchy about her girlfriend halting her attempt to celebrate as she would like, and has a stupid lover spat over it. Most of the Scoobies celebrate Christmas in a secular way, removed from the Christian trappings of the popular Western conception of the holiday, very removed in Carmilla's case, and Perry is indicated to be Jewish. Like with Willow and Buffy, Perry's Jewishness is very much an informed trait.
What are you doing for Christmas?
Being Jewish. Remember, people? Not everybody worships Santa.
With the difference in celebrating wintertime, the main aspect seen in the show. However, at least LaFontaine reminisces with Perry about going to her house and celebrating Hanukkah with her and her family.
Remember those cookies your mom used to make for Hanukkah?
Oh, yes.
So there's more about being Jewish than Willow just not celebrating Christmas, even if Hanukkah does get the Jewish Christmas treatment. Having a Jewish protagonist does get them some points against the problems of the Holocaust metaphor, but it really is only superficial. Within the construction of Christmas as a secular holiday, there is greater reverence for the Santa Claus-related figureheads. The reason why the villagers are afraid of the diner is because it's basically the witch's gingerbread house from Hansel and Gretel, with the change that the witch, played by Gillian English, is Mrs. Claus. Well, Mrs. Klaus, who one day snapped and murdered her husband, the helpers, and the reindeer, and turned them into food.
And a ground-up Rudolph into reindeer sausage. Yeah, Dancer and Prancer with a vulture and a Luger. And the signs got Dasher just like Freddy Krueger. And he picked up a flamethrower and a barbecue blitzen. And he took a big bite and said it tastes just like chicken.
She shows up and we're free from the static frame! Yeah, this was their opportunity to experiment, and they tried a different shooting style, and it's a massive improvement. I know the stage-like static frame has its fans, but I personally find it stifling. There's so much freedom in the dynamic camera. Thank goodness that the movie went in that direction too.
This is the Klaus Kuchen house, the most famous Christmas destination in all of Austria.
Oh, hi, random Austrian accent. Yeah, it's weird that this is set in Austria, but everyone has Canadian accents except for a couple of villains, Mrs. Klaus and Vordenberg, who we'll get to later. Even with the loose premise of Silas luring naive foreigners, it's an obvious contrivance of the Canadian production for ease of filming. With Vordenberg, it might be to remind people of Hitler, but there's no real reason to do it with Mrs. Klaus, so it's just a jarring reminder that it's set in Austria without other Austrian characters, like Carmilla, sounding remotely Austrian. And why does Mrs. Klaus have an Austrian accent? She's not from Austria. She's from the North Pole. Also, English cannot act well while doing that accent. Mrs. Klaus feeds everyone gingerbread cookies that used to be people. Carmilla, being more into blood than chocolate, though some like both, refrains. And the humans get into trouble, starting to transform into cookies themselves. It's up to Carmilla to save the day, but she's still pissed at Laura and insists on bickering about it before Laura demands that she murder Mrs. Klaus for her.
Murder her for Christmas! Murder her for Christmas!
Carmilla turns into a panther and horribly murders her off-screen, possibly an allusion to an item of Icelandic folklore involving a monstrous black cat preying on people at Christmas time, the Yule Cat, also known as Jólakötturinn, the Yule Cat. Laura celebrates her Yule Cat saving the day, and then she and Carmilla are able to recognize that Christmas isn't bought in a store or found in the gore. Maybe Christmas means a little bit more. It's a fun, sweet diversion, but it does ignore some of the troubling aspects to Carmilla's character, and Laura's refusal to contemplate the deeper moral issues inherent in this life and death struggle, which sets the stage nicely for season 2. Aw, look, they're sharing a cookie. That used to be someone who was horribly murdered. Sweet. Instead of fighting their way through the mob and continuing out to civilization, the Scoobies realize that Luffy hasn't actually escaped the way that she threatened to, and they return to Silas until the mob dies down. Luffy is just too big for the Lustig crater opening and has wedged herself in the gap. Yes, an Elder God Kaiju rampage would be interesting, but the web series only works on the small scale, so sorry Luffy, in the hole you stay.
Turns out escaping Austria across the Alps, not as easy as The Sound of Music made it out to be.
And that part of The Sound of Music is about fleeing the Nazis. Meanwhile, in the absence of the Dean and her vampire underlings, the campus has dissolved into anarchy, with the 3 powerful student groups, the Summer Society, Zeta Omega Mu, and the Alchemy Club, becoming rival gangs, dividing the campus up into their territories. In the Nazi metaphor, this might be an allusion to the Communist Party, the Nazi Party, and the Social Democrat Party. Which one is the Nazi Party? None of them are. It's a stupid metaphor. In the middle of all this mess, Carmilla leads the Scoobies to the Dean's former house to live in style, chasing out the squatters who found it first. Even Elise Bowman is impressed. The season opens with a glorious gothic atmosphere. A dark and stormy night, mood lighting, Laura greeting us, and Carmilla suddenly appearing from behind her. Wow, that must have taken careful blocking.
Whoa there, lady killer.
That's appropriate. She's killed a lot of ladies. Following the Christmas special, we're back to the static frame, but with a change. Not every episode in the season uses the same shot. Laura moves her laptop around, and we see different views of the house to break up the monotony. The main shot has a creepy painting in the background, depicting a woman in a turban and nothing else, stabbing 2 frightened women with a sharpened stick, while lifting her leg to step above them in an exaggerated dominance pose. This works better than the T-pose. The dominant figure is commonly interpreted as symbolic of the Dean, while the 2 victims are thought to represent Carmilla and Elle. Charming decor. It's also probably derivative of an ancient Sumerian carving of the goddess Inanna, demonstrating her dominance by stepping on a lion, holding its leash in a similar way as the turban woman holding her stick. Do we suspect there may be some kind of connection between the Dean and Inanna?
Well, there's a statue of Ishtar in the foyer that I'm pretty sure belongs in a British museum, and the walk-in deep freeze has shackles.
I'm pretty sure nothing belongs in the British Museum.
How do you think your ancestors got these? You think they paid a fair price? Or did they take it like they took everything else?
While Laura makes her video, both Carmilla and Laugh express doubt that she'll get through it without succumbing to her lust and sleeping with Carmilla. It's implied that she's been trying to make a video several times and has gotten distracted each time. Carmilla sees distracting her as a game, and Laura jokes about Carmilla taking advantage of her, which Carmilla responds poorly to. Laura has to assure her that she wasn't serious. It's interesting that Carmilla, the one with a penchant for stalking her objects of affection, is concerned about sexual ethics. We'll learn later in the season that she was the victim of a rape back in 1698, giving her this emotional vulnerability and concern that she might be acting like her assailant, which indicates that she views her relationship with Laura as a serious romance in contrast to her various flings. She wants to make sure she's being a good girlfriend. Meanwhile, Laura isn't quite as introspective, just trusting that things will work out because she's familiar with narrative tropes.
Maybe I am just some 19-year-old girl who only passed her lit class on a vampire fighting technicality, but I still know how this story goes. Good is triumphant and evil is vanquished.
Laura intends to wait out the Styrian villagers and leave as soon as they can reasonably get past that obstacle, but the power vacuum she created when she led an attack on the Dean comes back to bite her. The Austrian government is committed to ignoring the existence of Silas, so Silas is responsible for its own governance, which Laura cleanly disposed of. The presence of a government that could take disciplinary action, maintained order, and without it, heavily armed students run amok. This parallels the conditions in Germany following its defeat in World War I, when the Kaiser was taken out of power. Even though there was democracy, social order was breaking down, and street fights between adherents to conflicting political philosophies were common. And they at least had a functioning government in Weimar. Total anarchy sounds fun, until you run across a murder scene and can't report it to anyone. Perry goes to check out the Voice of Silas office, and returns covered in blood, reporting a massacre has taken place. Despite Carmilla urging her to leave it alone, Laura jumps in on another crusade to figure out who killed the student reporters and see them brought to justice.
Laura? No.
Laura, yes! She takes over the Voice of Silas with her vlog, creating the Silas News Network, or SNN, a riff on the American TV channel, the Cable News Network, or CNN. The SNN intro contains headings reading "The Truth" and "Their Lies," alluding to the Dean's propaganda that Laura saw passed in Season 1 to investigate the truth. Laura is dedicated to finding out what's really going on and communicating it to the students for everyone's benefit. Thematically, it references Nazi propaganda, the role of journalism in combating it, and Hitler's conception of the big lie. More on that later. SNN is largely an exposition segment, delivering information on the setting in an interesting way, and it is heavily derivative of Welcome to Night Vale. Lofi is a persistent background threat, increasing tension across the board. When Zetas irresponsibly start throwing cherry bombs at her for fun, she retaliates with mind control. With her Eska injured, she can't do the same Demon of the Light shtick, but she can influence students susceptible to manipulation, both people previously enthralled for the sacrifice.
Oh, I don't know if I'm okay with Lofi suffering.
And, in a bit of snark, animal rights activists.
Protesters? Protesting the inhumane treatment of the giant anglerfish.
She enthralls the latter and gets them to form a defensive perimeter around the crater. It may seem like modern silliness to stick this in a vampire show, but snarking at animal rights activists is actually present in the Dracula novel, where the SPCA tries to protect a monstrous wolf from harm, and the wolf in question is Count Dracula. It actually fits into this long tradition of vampire fiction. Though it personally appeals to my politics, considering that Carmilla is a leftist effort to get young women interested in feminism, this might be problematic to not show solidarity across leftist causes. It has a similar portrayal as SPEW in Harry Potter, which Carmilla is highly derivative of, and SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, is often interpreted as a racist demonization of abolitionism in the modern critical discourse. As things sit, leftists generally disrespect animal rights people as just white people imitating the way black people demonstrate against societal racism for a cause that's considered absolute nonsense, but I could see it not aging well the way Harry Potter hasn't aged well. In another decade, Carmilla could be derided for being speciesist.
Speciesist?
As part of Laura's crusade, she tries to make peace between the Summers and the Zetas. Reportedly, the Alchemy Club was going to feature in a scene, but they cut it for time. Previous Previously, we only knew Danny, Kirsch, and Will. Perry staked Will during the off-screen Season 1 climax, so now 2 new characters are introduced to buff out their ranks, and they're both characters of color to make the show more racially diverse. Mel, played by Nicole Stamp, an aggressive warrior woman, possibly derivative of Kendra and Buffy.
Blessed by the knight who first slew the demon. All else fails. This might stop it.
Look at this princess. Carbon fiber limbs, 80-pound draw weight, capable of shooting 160 feet per second.
And Theo, played by Shannon Kook, a cold, intelligent dude bro. Call him Will 2.0, sans vampirism.
Look, the fact that an undead fiend masqueraded around as one of our pledges...
Proves my point about your complete lack of moral fiber.
Hey, Will was an okay bro until he started kidnapping people.
You're an imbecile!
In the Nazi metaphor, Theo seems to be the equivalent of Ernst Röhm, an enforcer type who acted as a sort of gang leader in charge of the brown shirts, Hitler's thuggish lackeys, similar to the modern Proud Boys. I've talked about Röhm before on this channel, in his role as the gay Nazi, and guy who Hitler killed to consolidate his power, but his main role in the Nazi movement was as a brute. Theo is something of an elevated intellectual brute, but it's also a stereotypical role for the first man of color on the show. While adding diversity is a nice change, the unfortunate fact is that all of the protagonists were cast as white back when they didn't have access to the unionized actors of color, and now that they do, the only roles available are villains, or at least ugly reflections of protagonists. The writers eventually elevate Mel to honorary protagonist in Season 0, which is the flashback season following this one, but she doesn't really integrate with the core group until the movie. She was obviously conceived of as nothing more than the ugly reflection of Danny, as Theo is the ugly reflection of Kirsch, representing the harmful institutionalism of the Silas Greek system. As I think the writers sketched out the 3 main seasons in advance, and the production honestly didn't have access to competent actors of color to cast the main roles in Season 1, I don't think that the production itself is at fault, but that it's still a flaw of the series. Sometimes things are bad and you can only point fingers at larger societal forces. Laura gets the 2 sides to stop sniping at each other by humbling them with the names and faces of the murdered students. And we see the racial diversity is extended to the off-screen murder victims. Even though these characters are never featured outside of transmedia, the fact that their non-whiteness gets center focus for a moment does a lot to emphasize diversity in the setting and imply that the world is greater than the white Scooby Gang. While ranting at the bickering frat brothers and sorority sisters, Laura singles out Carmilla as the hero, a noble vampire who saved everyone, which makes Carmilla deeply uncomfortable. However, Laura doesn't notice. She's too busy being a good guy to be a good girlfriend.
Let me stress again, the heroic vampire who saved all of us. Yeah. Hi.
They agree to a truce to help Laura investigate the murders. It's kind of a weird new quest, but I can kind of get into it after a bit, and the Scoobies get into it too. It turns into a fun murder mystery about these dorky teenagers putting their heads together to do something extraordinary. And then this happens.
You just gotta know there's something juicy going on there.
Stop that! This isn't some project. This isn't fun. People are dead. Again. And the 3 of you acting like this is some Silas-themed episode of The X-Files with cool vampire girlfriends and disembodied sidekicks. Well, it's callous and it's cruel and...
hair.
Wow. What a buzzkill. Like, she makes a good point, but it's done in such a jarring way that antagonizes the viewers for being entertained by the entertainment. It's part of what makes the season hard to watch. Imagine if halfway through Fury Road, the action was interrupted by a rant about how immoral it is to appreciate the thrill of people in danger. Rude much? Carmilla challenges Laura over her apparently liking Carmilla less for who she is as a person, as for her perceived role as a heroic vampire figure. Laura assures her that this isn't the case, but doesn't seem to quite understand the problem. They make up, but the discussion ends uneasily, leaving Carmilla still concerned. The season has a theme about how characters like Laura interpret the world through stories and try to make their actual lives conform to their formulaic nature, with problems arising when the real world is more complicated than expected. The theme was present in Season 1 with all the geeky references, an antagonistic library setting, Laura being inspired by Veronica Mars and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and her quest to rescue Betty being based on her understanding of heroes fighting villains to save victims, but it wasn't featured in the foreground or with the degree of criticism that is present in Season 2.
If you were raised on narrative, like I was very much raised on narrative, especially those early childhood narratives. There's such a clear sense of like there was right and there was wrong, and you go out there and you do right and everything will turn out okay. And then you get out into the real world and you discover if you do right, sometimes that just makes you a chump.
Basically, Laura is lying to herself about how the world works, because the comfortable lie is more appealing to her. This is reflected in her doppelganger, Vordenberg, who tells similar lies as the dark reflection of Laura. This theme of storytelling is probably derivative of Buffy Season 7, Episode 16, Storyteller, a meta-episode in which reformed villain Andrew, here functioning as a stand-in for series creator and showrunner Joss Whedon, documents the lives of the Scooby Gang and forces them into entertaining narratives in a parody of the show itself.
Oh, stop it!
I was just...
No more.
By the end, Buffy realizes that his need to tell stories is a defense mechanism, keeping him from caring about the life and death struggles occurring around him. She gets him to admit that he's lying to make himself look better than he is, and he confesses his sins to her, after which he has a shot at redemption for genuinely caring about people hurt.
Stop telling stories. Life isn't a story. This isn't some story where good triumphs because good triumphs.
I really wish you'd cut out the mythologizing.
The what?
Trotting me out like some prized pony. Carmilla, the heroic vampire who saved the day.
But that is what you did.
Not the way you keep telling it.
Hall takes the storytelling theme to the level of an overarching series theme, dispenses with the meta humor, and has more to say about it than Whedon poking fun at himself. But Andrew's arc remains relevant to Laura's arc as Season 2 progresses. What gives the season its forward momentum is the arrival of a new vampire, Matska Maddie Belmond, played by Sophia Walker.
I like that she kicks ass. She's a boss, she's in control, she's got tons of confidence.
The chair of the Silas Board of Governors, which has been called together to deal with the anarchy on campus. She is the show's strongest, yet still problematic, effort at anti-racism. The novella contains a brief description of a black woman as a hideous racist caricature, probably just there to make the mother figure, what the dean is based on, scary by association.
"Did you remark a woman in the carriage after it was set up again who did not get out?" inquired Mademoiselle, but only looked from the window. No, we had not seen her. Then she described a hideous black woman, with a sort of colored turban on her head, and who was gazing all the time from the carriage window, nodding and grinning derisively toward the ladies, with gleaming eyes and large white eyeballs, and her teeth set as if in fury.
According to one interpretation I read, pairing a white noblewoman with a black manservant was a common way at the time to imply sexual immorality, and Le Fanu making the servant female implies lesbianism on top of that. This black woman is later referenced by the name Matska.
And after that she said, "I don't see the carriage. And Matska, where is she?"
The meaning of which historians are in dispute about. One interpretation is that it means mother, while two other theories hold that it means the more degrading servant or mud, the latter of which evokes a less than flattering racial identifier. The web series goes to lengths to undo Le Fanu's racism by making Maddie a glamorous aristocrat whose presence implies great power. She embodies the predatory vampire in a way that Carmilla only aspires to, with evil charisma rolling off of her in waves.
I'm powerful. I mean, I could step on all of them. I mean, they're all ants, but I don't, I let them do their thing, because it's actually fun to kind of play with the ants.
She is easily the best villain in the series, in my opinion, though I know some prefer Elle in the movie. However, it is unfortunate that the best role an actor of color receives is an irredeemable villain with some concerning allusions to anti-Semitic stereotypes in the subtext.
Hey. Excuse me, but who the hell are you? Carmilla. I'm your new roommate, sweetheart.
Who exactly are you?
Didn't you get the press release? I'm Matska Belmon, chair of the Silas Board of Governors. And you're the meddling teenager who murdered my mother.
Holy crap! Now that is a wham line. Maddie goes in for the kill, and Carmilla intervenes accidentally by enthusiastically greeting her sister by waltzing with her. A couple of things here. 1. Cool, an interracial family unit. 2. They seem to be a very close family. Yeah, okay. So, the series sometimes engages in innuendo and subtext to get a point across where it might be considered vulgar subject matter to be explicit. A prominent example is in season 1, where Carmilla studies with a girl, Elsie, in Laura's bed, and Laura is outraged that it happened in her bed.
In my bed. But it's fine, really, because when Carmilla's latest study buddy came over, I may have mentioned that Carmilla has raging cold sores and she should probably get herself checked out because they are like super contagious. Boom! Revenge is mine.
Subtextually, they slept together, but the production presumably didn't want to make this explicit. This creates a different experience for younger viewers who don't pick up on the subtext than older viewers who do. Now, canonically, Carmilla and Maddie are sisters. They met in adulthood and have no genetic relationship, but they effectively became sisters by virtue of their vampire family unit, which includes their brother Will and their mother, the Dean. Not to be confused with my mother, the Car.
Believe it or not, my mother did decided she'd come back as a car.
They then relate to each other as sisters. Purely as sisters. However, and this is a controversial take on my part, it seems to me that Carmilla and Maddie are coded as ex-girlfriends, even as they call themselves sisters. In season 1, Carmilla flirts with Laura by seductively teaching her the waltz.
Partners were face to face, chest to chest. All of that whirling. In 1698, it may as well have been sex.
Now Carmilla greets Maddie with a waltz. I doubt that's a coincidence. As far as I can tell, Maddie is subtextually Carmilla's ex-girlfriend, and Carmilla is presented with an alternative to Laura. Instead of partaking in heroic vampire bullshit, she could indulge in villainous vampire excess, and her choice of girlfriend thematically determines her alignment.
From what I hear, you're up to your gorgeous neck in this mess, sis.
Yeah.
That they refer to themselves as sisters, while seemingly implied to be former lovers, is a bit unsettling, but they're not genetically related, met in adulthood, and pseudo-incest is low on the list of their various offenses. They casually murder people all the time. Something that vaguely unsettles is appropriately thematic to a horrific vampire family. It doesn't have the larger problematic implications like Matska in the novella, and can be considered an upper-class variant of the incestuous redneck horror trope. Also, this scene appears to be a riff on the one in Buffy Season 6, Episode 12, Double Meat Palace, when Anya's former demon friend Halfrek shows up in front of Xander, moves to kill him, and Anya greets her in discordant friendliness. Laura and Xander are left with similar WTF expressions. Carmilla persuades Maddie not to hurt Laura as a favor to her. Maddie implies that this kind of thing where Carmilla falls in love with someone that the Dean told her to target has happened a lot more times than just with Elle. We know she was stretching the truth in her backstory material by conveniently leaving out Will and Maddie also being a part of her vampire family. I mean, Laura did tie her up and torture information out of her. She had every reason to be manipulative. Now, Maddie hints at a deeper nuance, where Laura isn't just a special true love, but one in a long chain stretching back centuries.
You went and fell in love with one of the Marks again, didn't you?
Love? No one said anything about
You little sap. But then again, you were always in the middle of some one great romance or another, weren't you? Oh, don't need him. He's a poet. Or her. She's got such a beautiful voice. Or that one. She's just too pretty to ruin.
This would seem to imply that Carmilla is bisexual, not just a lesbian. This is consistent with her flirtatious antagonism of Kirsch, complete with sexualized biting in Season 1, even if she is ultimately more interested in Laura. I'm not the only fan to read it that way. However, the official stance of the web series production is that this is an incorrect reading. Ellen Simpson and Steph Walkneen have both explicitly stated that Carmilla is a lesbian, not bisexual. I do think this is inconsistent with what we see in Season 1 and Season 2. Possibly because Jordan Hall just wasn't on the same page. Possibly part of the production got biphobic real quick. At the time, biphobia was becoming increasingly prevalent in the lesbian community because of the influence of the TERFs.
That tickles.
Oh, look at these. Such arms, such shoulders. The primitive by way of the neoclassical.
You were always in the middle of some one great romance or another, weren't you? Oh, don't need him. He's a poet. Or her. She's got such a beautiful voice. Or that one. She's just too pretty to ruin.
I think reading Carmilla as bisexual is completely legitimate, but that's controversial. Season 0, which Simpson directly wrote, contrasts with the scene by emphasizing Laura as Carmilla's special true love, her match, heralded by magic.
Ah, Merkella von Karnstein. Shall I grant you your fondest wish? You shall meet your match, an annoying shrill of a girl, one who truly challenges you.
But before then, in Season 2, there's the gritty reality of Carmilla as this extremely experienced bisexual ruiner of virtue who regularly eats people.
You're lucky. You're such a cute little monster.
I love how much is contained in that one line. We get a strong sense of Maddie having all the power, that Laura's fate is at the whim of capricious vampires, that Maddie and Carmilla have a flirtatious relationship, and that Carmilla never stopped being a monster, all in one line, with a beat, for the implicit meaning to sink in. That meets the trifecta of good writing, good acting, and good direction. Now at Maddie's mercy, Laura must deal with Maddie inserting herself into SNN broadcasts to censor everything that could disrupt the students' relative calm.
Let's just say I'm here to balance this program's pro-human bias.
Or what?
Wow, you're not even trying to pretend you're human. Okay, interesting tactic for keeping people from freaking out. Maddie's disinformation campaign corrupting honest journalism calls to mind the German term Lügenpresse, or lying press, used to accuse mainstream media of being corrupted by a malignant external force, often the Jews. The Nazis used the term to demonize journalists criticizing them and further their own anti-Semitic agenda. The Hitler quote featured at the beginning of this video pertains to the Nazi assertion that the Jews orchestrated a conspiracy to lie to the German people that they lost World War I through an actual military defeat, instead of the Jews conspiring to stab them in the back, accusing Jews of committing a big lie, an accusation that is itself a big lie. I think what Carmilla is trying to do is depict Maddie as Hitler-like in her silencing of the free press, accusing it of having an unfair pro-human bias, and asserting what amounts to state propaganda in the Silas setting, where the Board of Governors represents the Reichstag. However, there are also what we call unfortunate implications in depicting an honest journalistic endeavor being corrupted by a malignant external force and turning it into a lying press that will be opposed by the main Hitler figure.
Attempted to steal several humans' faces.
Acted out anxieties related to his appearance.
Tried to open a time portal.
Flirted with an alternative approach to chronology.
Rose from their graves to haunt the living.
Enjoyed a pleasant day out while making new friends.
Maddie continues her takeover by vanishing the library into a pocket dimension to literally downsize Silas. She first sends a group of goons dressed in black to confiscate a number of books to sell off. Though they're always off-screen, we can hear the tramp of their boots at one point. Again, this is an allusion to the Nazis, particularly the black-clad SS, and book burnings. Maddie is framed as a Nazi figure. However, in her later framing as a Jewish figure opposed by a Hitler figure, we again enter unfortunate implications territory. Her takeover actually resembles anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Is she not stabbing them in the back? In addition to being board chair, Maddie is part of an evil capitalist institution, the Corvée Corporation, named for a form of slavery from feudal society. Basically, evil, ruler, authoritarian people who will enslave you. The way it's pronounced also reminds people of corvus, which is a family of birds that includes crows, ravens, and rooks. Just as Carmilla is associated with cats, Maddie is associated with corvids. There are various crow sightings thematically connected to her, and her nickname is the Rook. This may be a pun, as it's unclear if the nickname refers to the bird or the chess piece, but the thematic association with corvids is still present. The Corvée Corporation, and the threat it represents, is thematically tied to Maddie. Maddie's function as an evil capitalist is evocative of anti-Semitic characterizations of financially successful Jewish people. The Rothschild conspiracy theory comes to mind. The popular anti-Semitic myth holds that Jewish people drink the blood of abducted Christian children, which fits in well with Maddie's vampirism. It's concerningly similar to anti-Semitic propaganda. Any kind of story about Hitler and Nazis needs to be done with care, and I don't think it was properly done here.
Is the board chair still here?
And to what do I owe the Ride of the Valkyries?
This line evokes the Wagner opera The Valkyrie, which was venerated by Hitler and other Nazis. Its most famous musical piece is called Ride of the Valkyries. Laura needs some leverage against Maddie, and Perry gives her the idea that Carmilla could use her sisterly influence to pump her for information, so Laura persuades Carmilla to do so, even though Carmilla is clearly reluctant. Laura has it in her head that Carmilla is a good guy now, and must reject all villainous elements of her former life to be a good guy. But Carmilla honestly likes Maddie and doesn't want to hurt her.
This isn't some story where good triumphs because good triumphs.
The parallel is to Laura insisting that her girlfriend must give up a friendship with her ex-girlfriend now that she's with Laura. In their talk, Maddie emphasizes Laura's naivety as bad for Carmilla, and Carmilla rejects it, but does she really? However, at the end of the day, they are vampires, and can be reasonably scrutinized for lack of commitment to actual ethics. It's not just a romantic drama, it's a bit more serious when you factor in Maddie's obvious evil, which includes things like mass murder and slavery. It's not elaborated on much, but as Maddie has inherited control of Silas, she has inherited ownership of the Silas students. As far as Maddie is concerned, everything can be itemized and fitted with a price tag, including the people. She refers to the human students as livestock, and follows the dean in referring to Laura as Carmilla's pet. Hi, Vampire Kink. And the possibility of her selling everyone to Corvée is a constant threat. The fact that a black woman owns a bunch of white kids is potentially very racially charged, but is utterly ignored here. It's kind of bizarre to me that nothing is done with the setup. It instead puts forward a post-racial constructed reality where it honestly doesn't matter what race anyone is. I could see this either being a good thing or problematic for ignoring a serious issue. I don't think I'm qualified to judge it, but will highlight it for others to duke it out over in the comments. One thing I would call problematic, or at least bad writing, is that Laura and the others don't seem to care that much. They don't like it, they just as soon not be owned by a scary vampire lady, but they're also dealing with a trapped anglerfish god, mind-controlling students, warring student factions, Maddie's various other actions, and Laura's romantic drama, so the whole slavery thing gets minimized. It's only when Maddie starts to not take proper care of her slaves that anyone actually cares about it. If you're gonna invoke something as serious as slavery, you should at least make a big deal, or give a solid reason why Vampire Kink makes it not matter. Yeah, I consider the slavery issue to be Season 2's equivalent to Season 1's, hey, let's torture someone and laugh it off, hijinks.
Ugh, I swear! Not killing us when we had you tied up for like a week.
9 days.
After Maddie lets slip that the Lustig crater is important, they go to investigate and observe Corvée goons drilling. Not to free Lofi, but to reach something called the First Gate, as if Maddie is preparing to descend into the underworld for some reason. In an effort to get an edge against Maddie, Laura contacts the only human member of the Silas board, an innocent-appearing old Austrian man named Lugenbaron Cornelius Hans Ulrich Aaron von Vordenberg, played by Ian D. Clarke, whose complicated name is likely a reference to Dumbledore's from Harry Potter.
Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore.
So why does he have an Austrian accent? Well, probably to remind us of Hitler.
Reminded me of the stuff in the 1930s.
But it's still weird that Carmilla doesn't speak that way too.
I was born Mercalla, daughter of the Count Karnstein in Styria, a duchy of Austria in 1680.
In theory, Vordenberg was at Silas in the 30s, in Austria, so he probably witnessed its annexation to Nazi Germany. I say in theory because he lies a lot. A big liar, if you will. His title of Lügenbaron, translated in the show as Baron of Lies, is also evocative of Lügenpresse. It's not a particularly coherent metaphor, which makes me fairly confident that the show creators weren't trying to be anti-Semitic. I just think it was very badly written. They probably did some research, brainstormed important details, and then kind of blended it together in a haphazard way. In the novella, Vordenberg is spelled with a U, not an E, and also using the German pronunciation should probably be Vordenberg, because the German V is similar to the English F. Vordenberg is the descendant of an ancient vampire-killing hero who compiled information about his ancestor and uses it to help General Spielsdorf in his efforts to kill Carmilla. In the web series, Vordenberg, with an E, Berg, explains that he is the descendant of a man who, so the tale goes, courted Carmilla back in the day, circa 1698, and she slaughtered his entire family upon becoming a vampire, for which he holds a grudge.
Fräulein.
This seems perfectly reasonable, casting him as an archetypal good guy, and reminding us that Carmilla seems like an archetypal bad guy, in line with the straightforward reading of the novella. Carmilla doesn't contradict his story, and even seems to confirm it with an acknowledgement of her past villainy, but you might note that she couldn't have slaughtered the entire Vordenberg family. If she did, there couldn't be a descendant. The Lügenbaron does have a tendency to stretch the truth. He cares more about telling a good story than an accurate one.
I knew a young lady very like you once. A great love affair. Ended before my voyage to the Hesperides for the golden apples of immortality. Turned out to be oranges, you know, so no immortality. But lovely juice. Not my place to tell tales. Unless, of course, you want to hear about my hunt for the mighty Yeti Migoy in the wilds of Tibet.
No, that's okay.
Reminds me of a family I met in Novgorod.
Nope.
That was the beginning of my great affair with the Grand Duchess Anastasia. Why, I have never encountered such perfidy since my battle of wits with the infamous Countess Lamotte.
Vordy, you know I lived through the stuff you're lying about, right?
You might call him a pathological liar, but it manifests more as an old man telling rambling tales of his improbable heroism. Vordenberg is a parallel to Laura, her ugly reflection, in the way that Maddie is to Carmilla, Mel to Danny, and Theo to Kirsch. And here we conclude part 1 of 3. Next part we get into everybody's favorite topic, Nazis. And also Carmilla and Laura breaking up. I think most people here prefer the Nazis.